Right, every time I bring up the Attitude Era, I'm really annoying and caveat my speech by saying it wasn't all peaches and cream. There's some really bad stuff in there. Rightfully so, though, people always ask me to provide examples, so that's where we're at today. We are going to go through WWE's best era and prove why, in many ways, it's also one of the worst. Caution advised too, some of this is horrible. Number 10, the pay-per-view undercards. We will start somewhat light and with a critical hat on. If you are used to modern-day wrestling and the matches we are given every single week, you will cry watching the Attitude Era. You won't believe it. Anything that's not a main event barely gets any time, and it's all just so random. 1998 and 1999 are the standouts because most fights just descend into chaos. Sometimes we call for the DQ, sometimes we don't. Sometimes there's not even a finish. Like I say, it would drive you crazy. Everything has to have a twist too because Vince Russo loved doing that, and you could smell his biggest idea a mile away. He thought the worst part of wrestling was the wrestling, so why have any wrestling? Go away. I think it's almost unwatchable today just because it is so nuts, and it hurts your brain. Like you try and invest into someone, but then they just explode. Totally bonkers. Number 9, the wrestlers who should have had far more care. Far be it for me to talk about wrestlers' personal issues, but when you are watching some episodes of Raw from this time, you can just tell certain individuals shouldn't be on TV. They need help. After his back injury, Shawn Michaels makes many a cameo appearance as a special guest ref and even the GM of Raw for a while, but he is not well. Sometimes he's cutting a promo and slurring his words. The Legion of Doom's Hawk is also struggling with addiction, and we turned that into a story which is beyond awful. The same for Dustin Rhodes too. He was going through it and we aired it all on TV. Why? The less said about Beaver cleavage the better, but at least that was a character. Even then, you want to talk about issues. He wanted to bang his mother. And that sentence should never be said, ever. There's also William Regal, who we soon learned was struggling too. I just want to remind everyone we always have to put health and happiness first. I don't think during the Attitude Era we did that. So personally, I'm not a big fan. Number 8, the era within an era. So I like the McMahon-Helmsley era as it was called. The wedding leaves a lot to be desired, but when they were together, I thought it worked and gave Stephanie her first proper run as a heel. The problem is when you watch it now, man, it is just so dominating. Nearly every Raw angle goes through them, which doesn't make sense because they are in charge, but it's the same as anything. If you appear too much, you get to the law of diminishing returns, and on segment number 42, I don't want to see it anymore. It's also why The Rock would actively say this on TV to cheers from the crowd. It wasn't just a face insulting the heel, it was somebody reading the audience and knowing what would pop them because they felt the same. And I do get the idea they're the bad guys, so we should be annoyed by them, but this really is too much. Balance is also key to a television show. Sometimes we forgot about this, to say the least. Once again, I don't need to see any character more than 5 times on a 2-hour Raw. It's a bit ridiculous. 7, the McMahons. Which also ties into this, we were all aware. Because Vince vs. Stone Cold was doing so well though, McMahon thought he should add the whole family, and look, it did make for some great TV every now and then. Go and watch the pop for Linda at Mania 17. It could be the loudest of the night. Much as the above, however, they didn't know when to rein it in, so sometimes you just see them over and over again. To be fair, it's most of the year 2000 where it does go overboard, and that's evident due to the then WrestleMania main event. Everybody wanted and expected Triple H versus The Rock because that was the match. But because Vince, Linda, Steph, and Shane all had to be involved, we added in Mankind and The Big Show and called it a McMahon in every corner. And once again, seeing Mick Foley in this spot was awesome, but it just didn't fit the direction we'd been headed in. It actually feels a bit messy. That's mostly because it was. There's a reason come Backlash 1 month later we finally did Triple H versus The Rock one-on-one, because that was always meant to be the plan, and we went and fiddled with it. Number 6, the lack of consequences. This actually applies to some of the better stuff as well. I assume came from the brain of Vince Russo. It's very much his style. The powers that be, however, just thought you wouldn't mind if there was a lack of consequences, and hey, for a long time we didn't. It's different when you watch it back now, though. It's well too obvious. I mean, you had Vince as the higher power, which was dumb and went nowhere. Do you remember when Stone Cold got run over? Whether it was Rikishi or Triple H, within 6 months Austin was teaming with Hunter, the man that tried to kill him. And as for Big Quiche, he'd been totally forgotten about. The Stephanie Triple H Kurt Angle story also just stopped one day, rumoredly because Tripp didn't want to lose his girl to the Olympic hero. But that doesn't mean they had to shake hands, and trust me, I saw him shaking hands. So if you wanted an ending, nope, screw you and thanks. There is, of course, the biggest one as well, which is Steve Austin and Vince McMahon shaking hands at WrestleMania 17. I don't think we ever actually explained that. And I'm still not over it. Number 5, the frightening level of danger. Wrestling has changed so much that today a talent can do a very well executed but dangerous move, and the internet goes nuts. They don't know how to work, etc. Then you go back to the Attitude Era, and my gosh, even on a random episode of Raw, people were just being bludgeoned with chairs right to the skull. Given what we know now about brains today, it is horrible to watch. For some reason, Kane and Mankind seem to get involved in a lot of these as they baseball swing weapons into each other's heads. And then there's that Hawk angle. The whole thing was awful, but we still got him to climb the Titantron? What are we doing? There's also countless people dangling from shark cages, and honestly, Bret Hart once said that he's not a stunt man, and I get it. There is just way too much risk as you do watch, and after a while, it becomes pretty darn uncomfortable. Number 4, the controversial Undertaker. So this can go one of two ways, depends how you feel about it. But people love to rag on the 1998 Austin vs. Undertaker feud at SummerSlam, including Stone Cold himself. He got knocked out during their clash, so isn't a fan of his performance. I get that. Personally, I was so invested I faked being sick so I could stay off school and watch this, however. So there's levels here. When you do get to 1999 though, my gosh. Clearly we felt like if we were pushing the envelope elsewhere, we had to do it with our oldest character too, so the Ministry of Darkness was born. It's creepy anyway, but before long they are crucifying people, trying to embalm Austin, and speaking in tongue. Takes the idea of spooky nonsense and goes way too far. New inductees also essentially get sacrificed on camera. They also chase Steve constantly to the point it gets a bit weird. And then there's that Stephanie wedding. Taker even kidnapped her. Don't pretend that the man himself didn't know either. Speaking to Ariel Helwani in 2023, the real-life Mark Calloway mentioned how moving away from the darkness was actually better, so he could live with the likes of Austin and The Rock on the mic. Even on his own podcast, he said, "I don't really like what we did with the Ministry. We did have to go properly crazy with it first, though. And man, I'm just gonna say it again, it was nuts." Number 3, it's only good for you. What I mean by that is how the audience is actually quite specific. You're not meant to realize this as a kid because you are a kid, but today when you do revisit the late 90s, you realize the product is not that inclusive at all. The treatment of women is constantly bad and offensive, and the amount of homophobia is horrible. And don't say, well, things were different back then. They shouldn't have been. Imagine being gay and liking wrestling. You'd have been really upset, I would guess. Most of the sexual chocolate stories were insulting to the trans community too, and sometimes there is straight up racism. It's not cool at all. It's why the changes made in modern times are much needed and why it's hard to watch it now. It's not right. That's the truth of the matter. Number 2, the constant awfulness. I am just going to focus on random episodes from 1998 here, just because it makes the point quite well. Because not only do you get the infamous time Trish Stratus was forced to bark like a dog, but Terry Runnels is also having a miscarriage, there's countless bra and panty matches, plus, once again, here we go, there's a lot of racism, not good. The skit where D-Generation X dressed up as the Nation has been rightfully trounced these days, but there's more to that. During his feud with Mankind, Triple H also pretends to be a Chinese doctor with the most shocking accent you've ever heard. DX even insinuate they have sexually assaulted Stephanie McMahon. The Rock also threatened China with that fate, but changed his mind because he doesn't think she's attractive. Then there's Jerry Lawler on commentary. Sometimes he goes way too far. Let's use that word again. It actually becomes uncomfortable. So I really don't think there's any excuse for this because television is meant to be entertaining. This stuff is not. Number 1, it ruined the next phase. So regardless what I say here, the Attitude Era was a huge success. You can't argue that. It was massive. When it ran out of steam though, and WWE saw numbers going the wrong way, they panicked. Makes sense. You want business to stay strong, but what did they do to try and keep the momentum? Made the content even more shocking. I mean it. It's why you get Vince McMahon just making out with all the women which nobody needed to see, and the non-finishes to matches actually double in number. Again, if it worked before, surely doing more will be even better. No. Rather than push new stars, WWE kept going back to the past too, which was great at the time, but yeah, it just told the audience what you're watching now isn't as good as it was a few years ago. The stories are also very much throw things at the wall and see what sticks, and before long we had Kurt Angle stalking Booker T's wife Charmel and saying the worst things. Even Angle has come out today and said he shouldn't have done this. It is really, really dark. That's not wrestling. Even years on, we were doing terrorist storylines because getting that chatter was so important. It's really only recently that we have moved on because the WWE got so hot again. Let's just keep it this way. Remember, these are human beings we're talking about, We don't have to treat them with such disrespect. Know any other things that people should be aware of when it comes to the Attitude Era? Make sure you let me know in the comments below before you like the video, share the video, and you can subscribe. You can also click the video on the screen, which is me shouting some more nonsense, which you may appreciate or you may not. But otherwise, thank you very much for joining me, my friends, and I will talk to you again soon.